Sometimes the dumbest mistakes cost more than just embarrassment. They cost lives. This 2-hour collection reveals jaw-dropping, tragically stupid deaths caused by shocking blunders and reckless choices. From unbelievable slip-ups to fatal errors, you won't be able to look away from these chilling moments. Get ready for a wild ride of jaw-dropping stupidity with devastating consequences. This is 2 hours of tragically stupid deaths of all time. What began as a daring and heartfelt mission to raise funds for a noble cause ended in tragedy, when a Brazilian priest's attempt to bring attention to a project close to his heart backfired in a way no one could have foreseen. In April 2008, Adalir Antonio de Carli, 41, was a Roman Catholic priest widely known in Brazil as the Balloon Priest. He was born on February 8, 1967, and raised under difficult circumstances. Following his parents' divorce, Adalir lived with his mother in Paraguay until her death when he was just 15. Returning to Brazil, he worked various jobs, first as a tire repairman alongside his father, then at his uncle's gas station, and also painting tablecloths to make ends meet. Despite his humble beginnings, he was an excellent student and known for his quiet demeanor. Unexpectedly, he joined a seminary in Paranagua and was ordained in August 2003. By 2004, he had become head of his own parish, where he developed a deep commitment to social work. One of Adalir's major undertakings was the creation of the Pastoral, a rest and spiritual support area for truckers passing through the port city of Paranagua. He held masses in the port's patio and took an active role in defending the rights of marginalized citizens, including the homeless. His activism led to multiple arrests, including the city's municipal security secretary. The same year, he protested the removal of small diners from the port area, successfully halting their eviction. Seeking to raise awareness and funding for the Pastoral, Adalir planned to break the world record for cluster balloon flight time, 19 hours suspended in the air. Although he took survival and mountain climbing courses in preparation, his history with aviation was uneven. He had previously been expelled from a paragliding course in Curitiba for refusing to attend theory classes and disobeying his instructor. Still, in January 2008, he completed a successful 4-hour flight from Ampere to Argentina using 600 balloons and reaching an altitude of over 17,000 feet. On April 20th, 2008, Adalir made his second and final attempt. After celebrating Mass that morning, he lifted off from Paranagua in a chair strapped to 1,000 brightly colored balloons. Though the weather was rainy and overcast, he pressed forward equipped with a parachute, waterproof gear, a global positioning system, satellite and mobile phone, a flotation device, and enough food and water for 5 days. His intended destination was Dourados, over 700 kilometers away, where his brother Marcos lived. Early on, he ascended much higher than expected, reportedly up to 19,000 or even 20,000 feet. 8 hours into the flight and about 30 miles off the coast, he contacted the Paranagua Port Authority and passed along his coordinates. He also reported being very cold and struggling with his global positioning system. It was his last known communication. That night, search operations began involving the Brazilian Navy, Air Force, and local firefighters. Although debris from the balloon cluster was found floating in the ocean days later, the search was called off by April 29th as hopes of finding him alive faded. It wasn't until July 4th, 2008, that the lower half of a human body was spotted by tugboat workers roughly 100 kilometers from the city of Mackay. Based on the clothing and other materials, authorities suspected it was Adalir. Deoxyribonucleic acid tests confirmed the identity weeks later. His remains were returned to Paranagua, where churchgoers greeted him with applause. A memorial mass was held in his honor, and he was buried in a special chapel. Though his life ended in tragedy, Adalir's legacy lived on, marked by a bold attempt to serve his community. It was July 4th, 2015 in Calais, Maine, near the Canadian border. Devin Staples, a 22-year-old from Orlando, Florida, celebrated Independence Day with friends and family. Devin, who had worked as characters like Gaston and Goofy at Disney World, was known for his fun-loving personality. The usual fireworks, laughter, and drinks festered that evening. Devin, known for his sense of humor, played around with a fireworks mortar tube, unaware that a tragic mistake was about to happen. The group was lighting fireworks throughout the night. At some point, Devin picked up the fireworks mortar tube and placed it on his head. His friends, thinking he was joking, tried to convince him to stop. Within seconds, Devin lit the firework, which exploded instantly, killing him. His brother Cody was nearby and described the scene as devastating. noting that nothing could be done to save Devon. The news of Devon's death shocked everyone who knew him. His family emphasized that Devon wasn't reckless. His brother mentioned that Devon often pretended to do silly things for laughs but never intended to hurt himself. This time, however, a joke turned into a deadly accident. Devon's mother, Kathleen Staples, believes Devon thought the firework was inactive. She told CBS News that Devon assumed it didn't work and placed it on his head as part of his playful nature. But once the fuse ignited, there was no time to react. His fiancée, Kara Hawley, who was present that night, explained that Devon was likely buzzed from alcohol and might have accidentally lit the firework. She recalled yelling at Devon when she saw the fuse was lit, but it was too late. The firework was a reloadable mortar tube meant to explode into the sky. Its exact type is unknown, but its power was strong enough to kill Devon immediately. His death shows the dangers associated with fireworks, which cause many injuries and fatalities, especially around holidays like the 4th of July. Psychologists suggest that young adults like Devon are more prone to risky behavior due to peer pressure and the desire to impress others. Dr. Art Markman from the University of Texas, Austin, explained that the brain's frontal lobes, responsible for controlling impulses, fully develop in the mid-20s, making young adults more likely to take risks. Devon's history as a fun-loving entertainer might have contributed to his decision to place the fireworks on his head. Alcohol likely contributed to Devon's poor decision-making that night. It impairs judgment, making it harder to recognize danger. Devon might not have realized the risk of putting a live firework on his head, believing it was a harmless prank. After Devon's tragic death, his mother began advocating for stricter fireworks regulations in Maine. The state had only legalized fireworks in 2012 after a 60-year ban. Devon's death was the first fatality since fireworks became legal. Kathleen argued that fireworks should be regulated similarly to firearms or vehicles, emphasizing their potential danger. State Representative Michel Lajoie echoed her concerns, suggesting stricter rules for fireworks use, though he acknowledged that it's hard to prevent every accident. Devon's family and friends remember him as a kind, energetic person who loved to make others smile. He had planned to become a veterinary technician and start classes later that year. His love for animals and his joyful spirit are how his loved ones want him to be remembered. To honor his memory, his brother Cody encouraged people to do something nice for someone and show love in his name. Gotten away with murder, literally. But just as Joseph McKinnon was finishing what he started, something else happened. Something far beyond his control. In the end, it wasn't law enforcement or neighbors who stopped him. It was karma arriving swiftly and without mercy. 60-year-old Joseph McKinnon lived in the quiet town of Trenton, South Carolina, with his longtime partner, Patricia Ruth Dent, age 65. A relatively unremarkable presence in the small community, Joseph gave little reason for suspicion. There were no known incidents of domestic violence at their residence, no calls to police, and no red flags that would hint at the grim events that would unfold one Saturday morning in May. That morning, as neighbors saw Joseph working in the yard, few gave it a second thought. He told one of them the hole he was digging was for a water feature. But in truth, the real reason behind the freshly dug pit was far more sinister. As Saturday progressed, Patricia failed to report to her job at the Mount Vintage Golf Course. Known for her reliability, her absence triggered immediate concern. Co-workers began calling and texting as early as 7:30 a.m., but none of their messages were answered. Meanwhile, outside her home, Joseph continued working over the grave he had dug the day before. According to the investigation conducted by the Edgefield County Sheriff's Office, Joseph had attacked Patricia inside their shared home. There were signs of a struggle, blood evidence later confirmed to be hers, and signs that the house had recently been cleaned. Patricia had been struck in the face, though the autopsy later confirmed that her cause of death was strangulation. After killing her, Joseph bound her body with tape, wrapped it in black trash bags, and dragged it through the home to his truck, which remained parked in the yard. From there, he drove the body to the back garden where the shallow pit awaited. Joseph was nearly done burying Patricia when everything unraveled. Neighbors noticed him lying motionless in the yard just before 10 a.m., prompting a call to emergency services. A neighbor attempted chest compressions before first responders arrived, but by the time deputies and medical crews reached the scene, Joseph was already dead. With no immediate signs of trauma, authorities initially suspected a natural cause, later confirmed to be a cardiac event, an apparent heart attack. But the investigation didn't end there. With Patricia still unaccounted for, deputies began searching the property more thoroughly. That's when they uncovered the trash bags in the freshly filled grave. The bags were carefully unwrapped, and Patricia's body was found inside, bound and hidden beneath the soil Joseph had been feverishly shoveling before collapsing. The discovery prompted a full forensic investigation. The pit, the truck, the cleaned house, and the timeline all aligned with witness statements, enabling law enforcement to piece together the final hours of the couple's lives. The results of both autopsies solidified what investigators had already suspected. Joseph had murdered Patricia, then died while attempting to hide her body. For the town of Trenton, a place with a population of barely 200, the incident was deeply unsettling. Residents expressed shock, unease, and sorrow. Some worried about safety, while others struggled to comprehend how something so brutal could happen right next door. Among those devastated was Patricia's twin sister, Pamela Briggs, who described her sibling as energetic, kind, and beloved by everyone she met. According to Pamela, a part of her was gone forever, taken in a moment of violence no one had seen coming. In the end, Joseph McKinnon's attempt to cover up a murder was halted not by intervention, but by the failure of his own heart. It was January 2nd, 2001, in Budapest, Hungary. Jimmy Zambo, a 42-year-old pop star, spent the evening at home with his wife and friends, drinking and enjoying their company. Zambo, widely known as the King, had become a legend in Hungary. His career was thriving with millions of records sold, and his recent album, Christmas with Jimmy, was topping the charts. He seemed to have it all. That night he was peaceful until early morning when Zambo became annoyed by a neighbor's rooster disturbing his sleep. Frustrated, he decided to scare it off with his 9mm Beretta. As an experienced gun owner and hunter, he didn't think twice. He fired 2 shots from a window and the noise quieted the rooster. Relieved, he returned inside, confident the matter was resolved. Zambo removed the magazine and prepared to show it was empty to reassure his wife that the gun was safe. However, he missed a critical detail. A bullet was still in the chamber. In a moment of carelessness, Zambo raised the gun to his head and pulled the trigger. The gun went off, and the bullet struck him in the temple. Panic ensued as his wife and friends rushed to help him. They called for an ambulance, and he was taken to the hospital in critical condition. Sadly, despite efforts to save him, Jimmy Zambo was pronounced dead hours later. News of his sudden death spread quickly, leaving fans and the country in shock. At first, rumors of taking his own life circulated, but a police investigation confirmed it was a tragic accident. Zambo, slightly intoxicated but not heavily drunk, had misjudged the situation, leading to the fatal shooting. For Hungary, the loss of Jimmy Zambo was hard to process. Born in 1958 as Imre Zambo, he had worked his way up from humble beginnings, starting in the state radio children's choir. After performing in the United States, he returned to Hungary in the 1980s, where his career took off. His albums went platinum, and he was even named Hungary's Singer of the Year in 1993. By his death, he hosted a popular TV show and had secured his place as the face of Hungarian pop music. As the details of his death became public, grief spread across the country. Fans gathered outside his home, lighting candles and laying flowers. Many were visibly heartbroken, mourning the man who had brought so much joy to their lives. His house became a shrine, with people leaving tributes in his memory. On January 5th, just days after his death, Zambo's body was laid out for public viewing at a Greek Catholic church on Sheppel Island. Over 30,000 people came to pay their respects. The next day, tens of thousands more lined the streets for his funeral. It was a grand, emotional event unlike anything Hungary had ever seen. Black horses drew his coffin, and mourners watched in disbelief as the procession passed by. The Mass, broadcast live on TV, showed Zambo's family flanked by 30 bodyguards, helping them through the massive crowd. Thousands of doves were released during the ceremony as his coffin was lowered into the ground. A crown was placed on a red cushion next to him, a final tribute to the man known as the King. Fans, some having traveled hundreds of kilometers, stood by, overwhelmed with grief. His death left a significant void in Hungarian pop culture that would be difficult to fill. Jimmy Zambo's life resonated with many, especially those who had lived through tough times in Hungary during the 1990s. His music provided comfort, joy, and a sense of unity. Even after his death, Zambo's legacy continues. His home remains a place of pilgrimage, and fellow musicians have recorded tribute songs in his honor. His albums still sell, and his influence on Hungarian pop culture remains strong. Jimmy Zambo was more than just a singer. To his fans, he symbolized hope, joy, and connection. October 14, 2004, a Bombardier CRJ-200 jet was scheduled for a simple repositioning flight from Little Rock, Arkansas to Minneapolis-St. Paul. There were no passengers on board, just two pilots, 31-year-old Captain Jesse Rhodes and 23-year-old First Officer Peter Cesars. Both were professionally trained, with Rhodes logging nearly 7,000 flight hours and Cesars just over 760. The aircraft had no known issues and had recently passed inspection after a minor error earlier that day. The jet took off from Little Rock at 9:21 p.m. Right after takeoff, the pilots began flying aggressively. Within seconds, they executed a steep climb that triggered the stall warning system. Soon after, they performed another high-force maneuver. After leveling at 37,000 feet, they asked to climb to 41,000 feet, the aircraft's absolute ceiling, a height only allowed under very specific conditions. Air traffic control approved the request. Rhodes joked over the radio that they were having a little fun. Once at 41,000 feet, the pilots celebrated reaching what some CRJ pilots call the 410 Club, even opening sodas to mark the moment. But the celebration was short. At that altitude, the air is thin, engines struggle to function, and wings provide less lift. The plane was barely above stall speed. The autopilot, trying to maintain altitude, kept pitching the nose up, worsening the situation. At 9:54 p.m., the stall warning activated. Safety systems kicked in, trying to correct the aircraft's angle, but the pilots manually overrode them 3 times. At 9:55 p.m., both engines lost power. One of the pilots was heard on the cockpit recorder saying, "We don't have any engines." Despite this, they didn't tell air traffic control right away. At that altitude, they still had about 100 miles of glide range and nearby airports they could have reached. Instead, they tried to restart the engines using a windmill method, diving the plane to spin the turbines. But they only reached 236 miles per hour, too slow for the restart to work. They then descended to 13,000 feet and tried to use the auxiliary power unit to restart the engines. All 4 attempts failed. The engine cores didn't rotate. Finally, at 10:03 p.m., 8 minutes after the engine shut down, they told air traffic control they had lost 1 engine, not both. They were now below 10,000 feet. By 10:09 p.m., they requested to divert to Jefferson City Memorial Airport in Missouri. It was one of 2 airports still within gliding range. At 10:14 p.m., they saw the runway, but they were too far. "We're not going to make this," Rhodes said. "We're going to hit houses." Cesars suggested keeping the landing gear up to avoid hitting buildings. Moments later, the plane crashed into a residential area just short of the airport. It flipped upside down and caught fire. Both pilots died instantly. Miraculously, no one on the ground was hurt. The National Transportation Safety Board launched a full investigation. The aircraft itself had no technical faults before takeoff. The right engine had overheated to 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit, far above safe limits. The turbine blades had melted and fused together, making a restart impossible. The left engine didn't show signs of the same damage, but investigators found the pilots never followed the correct restart procedures. Some experts suspected a condition called core lock, where engine parts cool unevenly and jam, but there was no evidence of it. The main issue was clear. The pilots ignored their training. They mishandled the emergency, overrode safety systems, and didn't communicate properly with air traffic control. Following the crash, Pinnacle Airlines made major changes. They lowered the maximum flight altitude for CRJ-200s, updated simulator training, and ensured all pilots were educated on high-altitude emergencies. In 2013, the airline rebranded as Endeavour Air. Flight 3701 never reached its destination. It's a case of what can happen when professionals lose focus, push limits, and ignore the rules they were trained to follow. August 2015 in Cantabria, a region in northern Spain known for its mountains and scenic views, Vera Mol, a 17-year-old from the Netherlands, was visiting as part of an adventure trip. She was excited, full of energy, and ready to try something new, bungee jumping. The activity was organized by a company called Flow Track, but what was meant to be a thrilling experience turned into a tragic accident that never should have happened. That day, Vera stood on a bridge in Cabazon de la Salle, getting ready for the jump. The bridge stretched across a highway and was used regularly by Flow Track, but this location wasn't legally approved for bungee jumping under Spanish law. Still, the company used it anyway. Vera wore a harness and a rope was attached to her, but that rope hadn't yet been secured to anything. If she jumped at that moment, there would be nothing to stop her fall. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. Her instructor, whose name hasn't been made public, stood nearby. He was the one in charge of giving the final signal, but there was a major problem. He didn't speak English well. In court, his English was described as macaronico, meaning very poor and difficult to understand. Even though he worked with international tourists, his instructions weren't clear. As Vera stood on the edge, the instructor said, "No jump." He meant she should not jump. She wasn't connected to the bridge yet, but Vera misunderstood. She thought he said, "Now jump." She believed it was time and she jumped. The rope wasn't anchored and she fell straight down. An investigation revealed several serious failures. First, the instructor should have used the phrase, "Don't jump." According to court records, that's the recommended phrase in these situations because it's much harder to misinterpret. The instructor didn't follow that basic safety rule. Second, Vera was underage. In Spain, you must be 18 to do bungee jumping. She was only 17 and the staff never asked for her ID. No one checked her age. Third, the company itself had no permission to run jumps from that bridge. Spanish law didn't allow it, yet Flow Track continued using it. The instructor worked for Aqua 21 Aventura, the local tour operator running the event. Both the instructor and another staff member were taken to court. They were accused of being careless in ways that directly led to Vera's death. A Flow Track representative, Martin Klom, later admitted in court that the incident happened because of a miscommunication. He confirmed that Vera had a rope on, but she was never actually secured to the bridge. The court called it gross negligence. The judge made it clear this wasn't just an unfortunate accident. It was something that could have been prevented. The people responsible didn't check her age. They didn't use the correct words, and they allowed a jump from a place that wasn't approved or safe. At one point, the company tried to place some blame on Vera, saying she jumped too early, but the court rejected that. The instructor was in charge. He was responsible for making sure she was safe and understood what to do. It was also revealed that the waiting area for the jump was unsafe. Participants were standing right near the edge without any barriers or safety markings. In the end, both the instructor and another staff member were found guilty and sentenced to prison terms between 1 and 4 years. The court made it clear Vera's death wasn't her fault. It happened because the people in charge failed in every way possible, failing to follow rules, failing to communicate, and failing to protect her. One word misunderstood at the worst time changed everything. Vera was there for a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Instead, it ended in disaster because no one took the right precautions.
It was January 27th, 2018, at Naya Hospital in Mumbai, India. Rajesh Maru, a 32-year-old man from Lalbagh, was there to help his brother-in-law's mother, Laxmi Solanki, who needed an urgent MRI scan for suspected meningitis and pneumonia. Rajesh, concerned but trusting of the hospital staff, had recently started a new job at a clothing shop in Parel and was known for his helpful nature. Rajesh was wheeling Laxmi on a stretcher with his brother-in-law, Harish Solanki. Upon reaching the MRI section, the staff instructed them to remove all metallic objects, as the powerful magnetic fields of MRI machines can turn metal objects into dangerous projectiles. However, the situation took a tragic turn when the ward boy, Vital Chavan, asked Rajesh to carry an oxygen cylinder into the MRI room. Rajesh hesitated, aware that metallic objects were not allowed near the machine. He asked if the MRI machine was turned off, but the ward boy reassured him, saying, "This is our daily work, don't worry." Trusting the staff, Rajesh carried the cylinder inside. As Rajesh entered the room, the powerful magnet of the MRI machine, still operational, pulled the metal cylinder with immense force. Rajesh, holding the cylinder, was dragged along, and his hand became trapped. The cylinder's flow meter broke, causing liquid oxygen to leak onto his face. Harish and the ward boy immediately tried to free Rajesh, but it was a struggle. Rajesh's left index finger was severed in the process. Despite their efforts, the excessive inhalation of oxygen proved fatal. Rajesh was rushed to the trauma center, but the medical team could not revive him. By the time they reached the emergency ward, he was already dead. The news of Rajesh's death shocked everyone in the hospital. His father, Galal Maru, was devastated, expressing disbelief and sorrow over the negligence that led to his son's tragic demise. The MRI room had become the scene of a horrific accident. The police quickly got involved, arresting Dr. Saurabh Landrekar, ward boy Vital Chavan, and maid Sunita Surve, charging them under Section 304A of the Indian Penal Code for causing death by negligence. The hospital administration initiated an internal investigation. A team from Philips, the MRI machine manufacturer, along with senior doctors, visited the site to remove the oxygen cylinder and Rajesh's severed finger. In the following days, the family faced additional heartache. Laxmi Solanki, the elderly woman Rajesh was helping, succumbed to her illness. The family, already mourning Rajesh's untimely death, had to cope with another loss. The Maru family's grief just gets worse with time. For Hindu families, it is essential to perform last rites for all body parts of the deceased. Rajesh's severed finger remained stuck in the MRI machine for days and was later kept at the Kalina Forensic Laboratory for nearly 18 months. The family made countless trips to the hospital and police stations, trying to retrieve the finger to perform the final rites. Finally, on June 20th, 2019, Rajesh's family received his finger from the forensic laboratory. It was an emotional day as they performed the last rites at Waukesha, cremating the finger and scattering the ashes in the water according to Hindu rituals. Rajesh's mother and other family members gathered to bid him a final farewell, hoping to find some peace after what happened. The incident shows serious lapses in hospital safety protocols. Idzis Kundan, the additional municipal commissioner for health, noted that CCTV footage revealed the negligence of the ward boy and attendant. They failed to enforce safety measures, allowing Rajesh to enter the MRI room with the oxygen cylinder. Both staff members were suspended pending further inquiries. Dr. Ramesh Barmal, the hospital superintendent, admitted to being unaware of the preliminary report's findings, but emphasized the need for a thorough investigation. The hospital's MRI machine, which was 7 years old, was out of service until it could be repaired. Patients requiring MRI scans were referred to other BMC-run hospitals. The Agripada police provided a detailed account of the incident. They confirmed that Rajesh's death was caused by excessive inhalation of oxygen. As Rajesh stood between the trolley and the MRI machine, the cylinder was sucked out of the trolley by the magnetic force, dragging Rajesh along. The police officer's statement raised questions about the trolley's material, as it should have also been affected by the magnetic field if it was metallic. The incident caught the attention of local politicians, member of the Legislative Assembly, MLA, Mangal Prabhat Lodha, announced that Chief Minister Devendra Fadnavis had agreed to provide compensation of 500,000 Indian rupees, or almost $6,000, to Rajesh's family. However, the family later claimed that the promised compensation was not paid. It was November 3rd, 2014, in Jersey City, New Jersey. Gary Anderson, a 58-year-old delivery man from Somerdale, had a routine job that day, delivering drywall to a high-rise construction site. He worked for George Hildebrandt Incorporated, a trucking company based in New York. The construction site was filled with activity as two 50-story residential towers and an attached hotel were being built on Christopher Columbus Drive. It was a typical day for Gary, but it would soon turn into a tragic one. Gary was known as a diligent worker. He had been with his company for a long time and was well regarded by his colleagues. His truck, marked with "Owned by God," was parked at the site as he prepared to deliver the sheetrock. Gary had a hard hat, but it was left in his car that morning. Around 9 a.m., Gary was standing near his truck, talking to another worker who was inside a pickup truck. Unbeknownst to Gary, high above him on the 50th floor, a construction worker was fiddling with a tape measure. The worker was preparing a wall for windows when the 1-pound tape measure became dislodged from his belt. The tape measure slipped from his hands and began its descent. The tape measure fell nearly 500 feet, gaining speed and momentum. According to City College professor Robert Alfano, by the time it reached the construction site below, it was traveling at nearly 140 miles per hour. The tape measure first struck a piece of construction equipment about 10 to 15 feet above the ground, bouncing off it before hitting Gary in the head. Gary, who was leaning into the truck window to speak with his colleague, was struck as he pulled his head out. The impact was immediate and devastating. Gary collapsed to the ground, unconscious. The scene was chaotic, as workers and bystanders rushed to his aid. An ambulance was called, and he was quickly transported to Jersey City Medical Center. Despite the efforts of the medical staff, Gary went into cardiac arrest while being treated. He was pronounced dead from his head injuries at 9:52 a.m., surrounded by his wife and daughters, who had rushed to the hospital upon hearing the news. The news of Gary's death spread quickly through the construction site and beyond. Gary's colleague, who had been speaking with him just moments before the accident, was in shock. "It's very scary," he said. "I had no idea something so small could do so much damage." Juan Bonilla, a worker at a nearby site, supported this statement. "Yeah, it's a little scary. You don't know what's going to happen," he said. Bonilla emphasized the importance of safety gear. "Absolutely. I think he would have been hurt, maybe in the hospital, but it would have probably saved his life," he said, referring to the hard hat that Gary had left in his car. A former construction worker near the site insisted on the importance of wearing a hard hat. "You don't work in this environment without a hard hat," he said. "He paid the price. You gotta have it." However, even with a hard hat, Gary's chances of surviving such an impact were slim. The speed and force at which the tape measure fell made it a lethal projectile. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration was called in to investigate the accident. Their investigation would likely focus on the circumstances that led to the tape measure falling, and whether all safety protocols were being followed at the site. OSHA's role is to ensure workplace safety and prevent such tragic accidents from happening. The construction site was temporarily shut down following the accident, and workers were sent home. The site belonged to AJD Construction, and neither the construction company nor the trucking firm, George Hildebrandt Incorporated, would comment on the incident. The development project was being undertaken by Panepinto Properties and Iron State Development, who also refrained from making any statements. Gary's death was not only a blow to his family, but also to his colleagues and the broader construction community. His colleagues remembered him as a hard-working and religious man. One worker mentioned that Gary had been telling a story and had uttered the words, "God is good," just before the accident.
2014 in Xinjiang City, China, when an ordinary accident turned into a horrific disaster. A woman visiting her husband's family had just finished using an open-pit toilet when she accidentally dropped her brand-new phone into the waste below. The phone was worth around 2,000 yuan, or about $320 at the time, and she was determined to get it back. She called her husband for help, and without hesitation, he jumped into the pit. But as soon as he landed, the toxic fumes from the sewage overwhelmed him, and he lost consciousness almost immediately. Seeing this, his mother panicked and jumped in after him, trying to pull him out. But she, too, was quickly overcome by the gases and collapsed. Now, with both her husband and mother-in-law trapped, the woman made a desperate decision. She climbed into the pit herself. The moment she entered, the fumes hit her, and she fainted. One by one, the family members were falling. Her father-in-law, watching in horror, tried to call for help, but in a final act of desperation, jumped in as well. Like the others, he was quickly overpowered by the toxic air and lost consciousness. At this point, the entire family was trapped inside. Neighbors heard the commotion and rushed to help. Realizing how serious the situation was, they used ropes to pull the victims out. But even some of the rescuers were affected. One neighbor fainted from the fumes. By the time all 6 people were pulled from the pit, the damage was already done. The woman's husband and mother-in-law did not survive. The others, including the woman, her father-in-law, and 2 neighbors, were in critical condition. They were immediately taken to the hospital, but the loss had already shattered the family. Authorities later determined that the victims had only been in the pit for about 5 minutes, but that was enough for the toxic gases to do irreversible harm. The realization was devastating. If help had arrived sooner, the outcome might have been different. As news spread, the community was left in shock. The woman's uncle, overwhelmed with grief, struggled to comprehend the sudden loss of 2 family members. What are we supposed to do now, he asked. The entire neighborhood mourned the tragedy, grappling with the fact that something so simple, retrieving a phone, had led to such unimaginable consequences. In the aftermath, the incident left an eerie reminder of how dangerous confined spaces with toxic fumes can be. The phone, the object that set off the entire chain of events, was never recovered, but at that point it no longer mattered. The real loss was the lives that had been taken too soon and the irreversible impact left on those who survived. This story is not just about an accident. It's a chilling example of how quickly things can spiral out of control. A single moment of desperation led to an unimaginable loss, leaving behind grief, unanswered questions, and a family forever changed. 1992, when Greg Austin Gingrich took a trip to the Grand Canyon with his teenage daughter. Greg was known for his sense of humor, always playing jokes and making people laugh. He and his daughter shared a close bond, built on adventure and fun. This trip seemed like just another opportunity for Greg to pull one of his classic pranks, but this time it would cost him everything. The Grand Canyon is one of the most breathtaking natural wonders in the world, attracting millions of visitors each year. But with its stunning views come serious risks. The steep cliffs and unpredictable terrain can be dangerous for those who don't take caution. Greg, however, wasn't thinking about safety when he decided to stage a stunt in front of his daughter. Standing near the edge of a guard wall, he pretended to lose his balance, flailing his arms and stumbling as if he was about to fall. The plan was to scare his daughter, then land safely on a small rock below, revealing it was all just a joke. His daughter, used to his antics, wasn't impressed. She simply walked ahead, assuming it was just another one of his pranks. But Greg had made a terrible miscalculation. The rock he intended to land on was much farther than he thought. As he slipped off the ledge, expecting to catch himself, he lost control. Instead of landing safely, he fell, plummeting nearly 400 feet. His daughter, unaware of what had just happened, kept walking, likely thinking he would come up laughing, as he always did. By the time she realized something was wrong, it was too late. Park rangers arrived at the scene, and after a search, they found Greg's body at the bottom of the canyon. What had started as a harmless joke had turned into a tragedy. Greg's daughter was left in shock. One moment she had been with her father listening to his jokes, the next he was gone. The reality of what had happened was something she would carry for the rest of her life. This wasn't the first time someone had lost their life at the Grand Canyon. Every year, around a dozen people die in accidents there. Many are due to missteps near the edge, misjudging distances, or ignoring safety warnings. The canyon's cliffs are unforgiving, and even the smallest mistake can have fatal consequences. Greg's story is a chilling example of how unpredictable nature can be. He was confident in his ability to pull off the prank, never considering that a small error could lead to disaster. He assumed he knew the terrain well enough, but nature doesn't care about confidence. It only reacts to actions. His family was left to grieve, and his daughter in particular had to live with the memory of that day. What was meant to be a simple joke turned into an event that would haunt her forever. Greg's death was not about recklessness or a lack of experience. It was a case of underestimating the danger. The Grand Canyon is beautiful, but it commands respect. One misstep, one wrong move can change everything. While accidents like these are rare, they do happen. Many visitors let their guard down, caught up in the excitement of exploring such a majestic place. They take risks for the sake of thrill or fun, forgetting that nature doesn't play along. If Greg had thought twice before attempting his prank, he might have walked away from that trip with just another funny story to tell. Instead, his daughter left the Grand Canyon without her father, forever carrying the weight of that day. For those who visit places like the Grand Canyon, Greg's story is a reminder. Beauty can be deceiving, and nature is not something to take lightly. A single moment of miscalculation can change everything, and sometimes there is no second chance. It was August 26, 2012 in Kalispell, Montana. Randy Lee Tenley, a 44-year-old man known for his love of the outdoors, had lived in this quiet area most of his life. Friends called him Tater. He enjoyed hunting, camping, fishing, and boating. He was well-liked and had many close friends. But that Sunday night, he made a choice that no one could have predicted. Randy wore a camouflage ghillie suit, the kind used by military snipers to blend into natural surroundings. His plan was to walk onto the highway at night to pretend to be Bigfoot. According to his friends, he wanted passing drivers to believe they had seen the creature and report it. At around 10:30 p.m., Randy stepped into the southbound lane of U.S. Highway 93, just south of Rocky Cliff Road. There were no lights, no signs, and nothing to alert drivers. The suit made him nearly invisible in the dark. A 15-year-old girl from Summers was driving the first vehicle. She didn't see Randy until it was too late. She struck him, knocking him to the ground. Moments later, another car driven by a 17-year-old girl, also from Summers, came down the same lane and ran over Randy as he lay in the road. He suffered severe injuries and died at the scene. Emergency services responded quickly, but there was nothing they could do. One teenage passenger had minor injuries and was taken to the hospital, but the drivers were left traumatized. Police began an investigation. Trooper Jim Schneider from the Montana Highway Patrol spoke with Randy's friends. They explained that he was trying to pull off a Bigfoot hoax, not for fame or money, but just for fun. Trooper Schneider said, "You can't make it up. I haven't seen or heard of anything like this before." No 911 calls were made about a Bigfoot sighting that night. The only calls were to report the accident. Investigators considered whether alcohol may have been involved. Toxicology tests were ordered, though results weren't immediately available. Officers believed it might have played a role, but that was not confirmed. The ghillie suit, combined with the time of night, made Randy nearly impossible to see. Even with headlights, the suit would have blended in with the surroundings. On a forest trail, it might have worked, but on a highway, it made him nearly invisible. Randy's identity was released days later. Born on December 10, 1967 in New Martinsville, West Virginia, he moved to Kalispell when he was young. He graduated from Flathead High School in 1985. He had worked at Plum Creek for over 10 years and later at Mergenthaler Transfer and Storage for 5. He left behind a son named Hunter, his mother and stepfather, 3 sisters, a brother, and many relatives. His father, Earl Tenley, had passed away earlier. A private burial and public memorial were held on September 1st at Flathead Christian Center. The story spread quickly. Media across the country reported on the strange and tragic case. A man attempting a Bigfoot hoax had been hit by 2 teen drivers and died instantly. Even experienced officers said they had never encountered anything like it. Bigfoot sightings are often reported in remote forests, especially in the Pacific Northwest. Scientists don't support its existence, and most claims are seen as hoaxes or mistakes. One well-known video from Bluff Creek, California in 1967 is widely believed to show a person in costume. Randy's death raised serious concerns. If people continue faking Bigfoot sightings, it could lead to more danger. Some in the Bigfoot community even debated whether it would be right to harm such a creature to prove it's real. Others argued against it, but the more urgent issue was clear. What if the figure someone sees is not Bigfoot, but a person? That night it was. There's no record showing Randy had done this before. Some thought he may have, but nothing was confirmed. This would be the last time. The teen drivers weren't charged. They had no chance to avoid the crash, and officers said they weren't at fault. Randy wanted people to believe in something strange, but no one saw Bigfoot that night. Instead, 2 young drivers witnessed something they'll never forget, and a man lost his life in the process. Evening of December 27th, 2024, in Marewa, a quiet suburb in Napier, New Zealand. The weather was warm, and families were enjoying the last days of the holiday season. But for one family, that night would mark the start of something they would never recover from. Rife Cotter was 33 years old. A father of 3, he was known in his community as kind, generous, and dependable. His sister Robin Rawiri described him as patient and humble. Rife was the kind of person who would go out of his way to help others, whether that meant diving for seafood to share or simply being there for his children. He also played rugby for the Eskview and Districts Rugby Football Club, where he was known for his speed on the field and his sense of humor off it. To his teammates, Rife wasn't just a player. He was a friend who made every moment better. At home, he was a dedicated father. His partner, Holly Tengahui, said he was the best dad and closest friend she could ask for. Together, they were raising 3 children, Amaya, Mitara, and Aotarangi. After his passing, a Give a Little page was created to support them as Holly faced life without him. That evening, Rife came across a mattress. It's unclear whether he found it or someone gave it to him. What we do know is that he decided to take it home. Without a proper way to secure it, Rife placed the mattress on top of a black station wagon and lay on it himself, hoping to hold it down with his body. He asked his cousin, 23-year-old Trinity Brown, to drive. Trinity agreed even though she had consumed alcohol earlier. The plan was simple, a short drive of just over 1 kilometer from the Marewa shops on Kennedy Road to a nearby residential area. As the car moved, the wind pushed against the mattress. Reef had no safety straps, just his grip and balance. Witnesses saw the unusual sight, a man lying on top of a moving car. But before anything could be done, things went wrong. Around 9 p.m., emergency services were called to Newfield Avenue. Rife had fallen from the roof and landed on the road. His injuries were severe. First responders arrived quickly, but he had already passed away. Police confirmed that no other vehicles were involved and that his injuries came from the fall alone. They collected the station wagon for evidence and asked the public for help to understand exactly what happened. On Sunday, 2 days later, police publicly confirmed Rife's identity. His family shared their grief online. Holly posted on Facebook calling him a loving dad, son, and brother, remembering his energy and humor. His rugby club also shared a tribute, saying he would always be part of their team. Then on December 30th, police arrested Trinity Brown. She was charged with reckless driving, causing death, and driving over the legal alcohol limit. Trinity was Rife's cousin, making the consequences even more personal. In February 2025, she appeared in Napier District Court and admitted to both charges. Judge Russell Collins described the incident as a preventable tragedy. He acknowledged her regret and the support she still had from family members. Instead of sending her to prison, the judge sentenced Trinity to 12 months of home detention and banned her from driving for 2 years. She was also ordered to avoid alcohol and non-prescribed substances and attend counseling. Judge Collins told her the best way to honor Reef's memory was to live responsibly and make sure nothing like this happened again. Reef Cutter's loss was deeply felt in Marewa. He was more than someone in a tragic story. He was a father, a teammate, and a loyal friend. Donations and messages poured in for his family. Police closed the case, stating clearly, no foul play, no other vehicles. Just one risky choice that changed many lives in seconds. It was the early morning of February 15th, 2014, in Little Rock, Arkansas. Adrian Broadway, a 15-year-old high school student, was out with 6 friends. They were in the middle of a prank war with another teen, someone they'd known for a while. Months earlier on Halloween, that teen, the son of a man named Willie Noble, had pranked Adrian's group. Now they were getting back at him. They packed eggs, mayonnaise, toilet paper, and leaves into a car. It was all meant to be fun, just a harmless prank. At around 1 a.m., the group drove to the Noble house and smeared the condiments over a parked car in the driveway. That car belonged to Willie Noble. What followed wasn't something anyone could have predicted. Willie Noble, a 48-year-old man, didn't call the police. He didn't ask his son what had happened. Instead, according to authorities, he went back into his house and waited. Later, he told police he believed the teens would return and that he only wanted to scare them. About 45 minutes later, the teens did come back. They weren't planning another prank. They were likely just driving by. As they passed in a white Hyundai Sonata, Noble came out of his home holding a handgun. Without saying a word, he opened fire. Bullets tore through the car. The window shattered. One bullet hit the driver, 18-year-old Deshoni Nelson, in the hand. Another struck Adrian Broadway in the head while she sat in the passenger seat. Nelson, bleeding, managed to drive the group to the nearest place he could think of, a come-and-go gas station. There they called 911. Paramedics rushed Adrian to Arkansas Children's Hospital, but her injuries were too severe. She was pronounced dead not long after. News of her death spread quickly through Little Rock. Adrian was known for her cheerful personality and energy. Friends described her as kind, funny, and full of life. That evening, a candlelight vigil was held in her memory. One of her close friends, Princess Pearson, said she was always smiling, always laughing. "We were always just playing around, being goofy." Another friend, Lagia Bland, said through tears, "They were trying to be teenagers. Teenagers make mistakes. This was one of those mistakes." Online, the response was just as emotional. A Facebook memorial page filled up with messages from people who knew her and those who didn't. Social media was flooded with reactions. People were stunned. What had started as a harmless prank had now turned into something irreversible, and the person responsible wasn't another teen. It was an adult. Willie Noble was arrested the same day. He faced several charges, including one count related to Adrian's death, multiple counts of endangering others in the car, and using a firearm during the incident. His bond was set at $1 million. Noble told investigators he only wanted to scare the group and didn't intend to hurt anyone, but the facts didn't support that. The teens were already leaving when the shots were fired. The damage to the car showed he had aimed directly at it. The passenger side was full of bullet holes. Police confirmed the teens had not tried to enter the home or confront Noble. They had only vandalized the car and were driving away when he shot at them. During the trial, Noble's defense said he acted out of fear and had the right to protect his property. Arkansas law allows for the use of force under certain conditions, but this case pushed those limits. He was found guilty. The court convicted him on all charges. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Noble later appealed. His legal team argued that the specific charges didn't fit what happened. But in April 2017, the Arkansas Supreme Court upheld the conviction, stating that the evidence showed Noble's actions caused Adrian's death. One justice did disagree, believing the law was misapplied, but the ruling stood. Adrian's story didn't come from a planned act of violence. It came from a decision, a moment of anger that changed everything. The prank had been childish but not harmful. The response, though, was deadly, and that moment left a permanent impact on Adrian's family, her friends, and the entire city of Little Rock. Lives can change in mere seconds in the most unexpected ways. It is a truth that the town of Lashevo, nestled near the Volga River in Russia's Tatarstan Republic, came to understand on a fateful day in 2013. It began with a simple household task that spiraled into a catastrophic loss, leaving a young girl as the sole survivor of her family. It all started when Mikhail Chilishev, a 42-year-old law professor at Kazan Federal University, descended into the family's cellar. It was supposed to be a simple, routine task, but unbeknownst to Mikhail, the potatoes stored in the cellar had rotted, releasing what was a foul odor, and even more importantly, a deadly gas. Glycoalkaloids, naturally occurring toxic compounds in potatoes, had accumulated to lethal levels, creating a virtually undetectable trap in the small room. Soon after Mikhail entered the cellar, the noxious fumes completely overwhelmed Mikhail, and he collapsed, never to rise again. A short while later, when Mikhail failed to return, his wife Anastasia became worried. The woman, who was 38 years old, decided to follow him into the cellar, concerned for his safety. Sadly, this decision sealed her fate. She entered the cellar and was overcome by the toxic gas almost immediately. She collapsed to the floor, joining her husband in his untimely end. Their son, Georgy Chelishev, was alarmed by his parents' prolonged absence. After all, they were supposed to go into the cellar and get right back, something they'd done so many times before. Concerned, Georgy, who was only 18 years old, entered the cellar next, only to succumb to the same deadly fate. Meanwhile, Anastasia's mother, 68-year-old Iraida, became increasingly anxious. She couldn't help but feel that something was incredibly wrong with her family. She decided she needed assistance, so she called a neighbor for help. But Iraida did not wait for help to come. The older woman took the matter into her own hands and decided to act herself. Tragically, Iraida also descended into the cellar before help could arrive, sealing her fate alongside her loved ones. In a twist of fate that resembles something out of a fairy tale, the family's daughter, 8-year-old Maria Chelisheva, was the only one of her family to survive. When she reached the cellar, she saw that the door was open, which allowed the lethal gases to dissipate enough to spare the little girl. But the sight she encountered would forever haunt her. Her entire family, her father, her mother, her brother, and her grandmother, lay lifeless on the floor. it was too late. The aftermath of this tragedy left Maria orphaned and inconsolable. Maria Chelisheva was taken in by relatives, but nothing could bring her family back. Her dad, Professor Mikhail Chelishev, was honored by Kazan Federal University in a moving ceremony held in its marble hall. The devastating incident highlighted the hidden dangers of everyday foods. Potatoes, a dietary staple, can produce toxic glycoalkaloids such as solanine and chaconine, especially when stored improperly or allowed to rot. These compounds disrupt cell membranes and affect the nervous system, causing symptoms like weakness, confusion, and in severe cases, death. Exposure to light, age, and physical damage significantly increase glycoalkaloid levels, concentrating the toxins just beneath the skin. While rare, poisoning from potatoes can have fatal consequences, as this tragedy so painfully demonstrated. It began as an ordinary Sunday in a quiet village near Heidenheim in Germany. Ludwig A., a 79-year-old man, and his wife, 80-year-old Inge, spent the first part of their day going to church. And then, it was time for their traditional Sunday roast. But the couple decided to forego this culinary tradition for a hearty vegetable stew. By the end of the day, it was clear that this seemingly innocent event would lead to an unimaginable tragedy. The couple had received zucchini from Ludwig's sister-in-law's garden, something that had become a yearly tradition by then. Alongside potatoes, onions, and turnips, the zucchini became the centerpiece of their lunch. As they ate, though, they noticed something was unusual about their stew. The dish was uncharacteristically bitter. They were accustomed to bitter taste since they grew and enjoyed radishes from their garden. But this was different. Inge chose not to finish her meal. Ludwig, however, ate his portion despite the bitterness. 2 hours later, they came to regret their decision. Both fell violently ill. Nausea and relentless vomiting gripped them, accompanied by diarrhea. Out of the two of them, though, Ludwig was faring worse. His condition rapidly worsened. His strength dwindled. And then, his face turned yellow. Alarmed, they decided it was time to seek medical help. Their family doctor promptly referred them to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed severe poisoning. The culprit, cucurbitacin, a toxic compound sometimes found in plants of the Cucurbitaceae family, including zucchini. The toxic compound is rare in cultivated vegetables, but can occasionally reappear due to cross-pollination with wild plants. Its bitter taste serves as a warning, but Ludwig and Inge had been unaware of its danger. The toxin attacked their organs with devastating effects. In Ludwig's case, his lungs became inflamed, and according to Inge, the toxin shredded his intestines. Inge, who had eaten less and vomited more frequently, began to recover. Ludwig's condition, however, spiraled downward. Inge made a full recovery and was discharged from the hospital. But Ludwig wasn't as fortunate. 3 days later, Ludwig A. passed away. Inge later reflected that her survival might have been due to her swift and severe reaction to the toxin, which expelled much of it from her system before it could do irreparable harm. His tragic death prompted investigations by health authorities and the Ellwangen Public Prosecutor's Office. The Chemical and Veterinary Investigation Office, also known as CVUA, issued an urgent warning. Vegetables such as zucchini, pumpkins, and cucumbers that taste bitter should not be consumed, as this could indicate the presence of cucurbitacin. Maria Roth, the CVUA's director, confirmed that Ludwig's death was the first recorded fatality from this toxin in zucchini. What was meant to be an uneventful overnight flight from Moscow to Hong Kong became one of the most haunting aviation disasters in history, the result of a reckless decision. Aeroflot Flight 593 departed Sheremetyevo International Airport on March 23, 1994, carrying 75 people aboard an Airbus A310, bound for Kaitak Airport. Operated by Russian International Airlines, the flight included mostly Russian nationals, with about 30 airline employees and their families, as well as several businessmen from Hong Kong and Taiwan. On board were Captain Andrei Danilov, First Officer Igor Piskaryov, and Relief Captain Yaroslav Kudrinsky, an experienced pilot with over 8,900 flying hours. Kudrinsky had also brought along his two children, Yana and Eldar, on their first international trip, a decision that would prove catastrophic. It was shortly after midnight, roughly halfway through the flight, and the plane was cruising over Siberia. Captain Kudrinsky invited his two children into the cockpit. He wanted to let them experience flying. At 12:43 a.m., Yana, age 13, was seated at the controls while Kudrinsky subtly adjusted the autopilot's heading to give her the illusion of turning the plane. She had no real control. A few minutes later, Eldar, aged 15, took his turn in the seat. What followed was a sequence of devastating mistakes. By moving the control stick for over 30 seconds, Eldar unknowingly partially disengaged the autopilot. The crew, unfamiliar with the aircraft, didn't notice the change. And then, the aircraft began a slow but steady roll to the right. As the bank angle increased, the pilot started noticing something was amiss. In just seconds, the aircraft tilted beyond 45 degrees, then past 90, an angle the Airbus A310 was never meant to sustain. Gravity forced the plane into a rapid descent, and the increased G-forces hampered the crew's movements. The autopilot, only partially engaged, attempted to correct the climb and maintain altitude. This caused the plane to stall, and finally the autopilot disengaged entirely, leaving the crew with full manual control. Kudrinsky managed to return to his seat and told his children to return to their seats. The situation was dire. The pilots tried to correct the mistakes, but it was no use. The plane began spinning. They recovered briefly, just long enough to attempt another correction, but the plane started spinning again. By then, the aircraft had lost too much altitude. At 12:58 a.m., 16 minutes after Yana first entered the cockpit, Aeroflot Flight 593 slammed into the Kuznets-Galito mountain range at roughly 160 miles per hour. All 63 passengers and 12 crew were killed on impact. No distress call was made. The landing gear was up. All passengers were secured in their seats, having been prepared for an emergency, though they had no way of knowing the true extent of the danger. The wreckage, strewn across a remote Siberian hillside, was discovered 2 days later, and flight data recorders were recovered soon after. In the aftermath, Aeroflot initially denied any breach of protocol in the cockpit, but when a Moscow-based magazine published transcripts from the cockpit voice recorder, the truth emerged. The final moments captured chilling warnings from Kudrinsky to his children, including a desperate plea for Eldar to move to the back of the cockpit. He attempted to soothe them with reassurances that everything was normal, when in fact the situation was out of control. Investigations found no technical faults with the aircraft. Analysts concluded that had the crew allowed the autopilot to correct the aircraft's initial dive without interference, the plane would have stabilized and the crash might have been avoided. The accident served as a grim reminder of the consequences of disregarding cockpit protocols. For the families of the victims, especially those who had placed their trust in an experienced crew and a reputable airline, the emotional toll was immeasurable. In the years that followed, mourners from Russia, China, and Taiwan visited the crash site, leaving flowers, handwritten notes, and fragments of memory scattered across the desolate hillside where 75 lives had ended in silence. 2004, and the world was under a global health crisis. Taiwan, like many countries, was battling severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS, a deadly virus that had claimed hundreds of lives. Amidst this, a 45-year-old woman, terrified of getting sick, took drastic measures. She believed that soaking in a bathtub filled with 40.5% ethanol would protect her from the virus. Unfortunately, her attempt to shield herself had fatal consequences. Around 11 p.m., the woman filled her bathtub with ethanol and got in, thinking it would act as a barrier against SARS. Her family, unaware of her actions, went about their night. By the next morning, they found her in the tub, lifeless. It was 11 a.m., and it was already too late. At first glance, there seemed to be nothing unusual about her death. Her head was above the ethanol, and there were no signs of trauma or drowning. Investigators found no evidence of drugs, and her stomach was empty, ruling out alcohol ingestion. Yet her blood alcohol concentration, or BAC, was an alarming 1.35%. To put it in perspective, a BAC of 0.4% can be lethal. So how did she end up with such a high BAC without drinking? The answer was skin absorption. Normally, the skin doesn't absorb enough alcohol to cause harm. But in this case, the woman had been immersed in the ethanol for nearly 12 hours. Over time, her body absorbed a significant amount of alcohol through her skin. On top of that, She likely inhaled alcohol vapors, speeding up the process. As her BAC rose, the alcohol began affecting her central nervous system. By the time her BAC reached 0.1% to 0.2%, she was likely disoriented and unable to move. She probably couldn't climb out of the bathtub, leaving her trapped as her body continued to absorb more alcohol. Eventually, her BAC reached the fatal level of 1.35%. When her family found her, there was nothing they could do. This rare case stunned the medical community. Alcohol poisoning through skin absorption is almost unheard of in adults. However, the woman's extended exposure to ethanol and her decision to use such a high concentration created a dangerous situation. Researchers who examined the case estimated she absorbed about 1.5 liters of ethanol, enough to kill her. The SARS outbreak triggered widespread fear, leading people to take extreme measures to protect themselves. In Taiwan, over 660 cases of SARS have been reported, and 73 people have died. The woman, like many others, was caught up in the panic, but her desperate attempt to avoid infection ended in tragedy. Sadly, this case is not unique. During times of crisis, people often resort to dangerous methods out of fear. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, some people ingested or injected harmful substances in an attempt to protect themselves from the virus. Following the woman's death, public health officials urged the public to avoid unverified remedies. The World Health Organization, WHO, clarified that while alcohol-based hand sanitizers effectively kill germs, the amount of alcohol absorbed through the skin during regular use is safe. They warned against bathing in alcohol or using it in unsafe ways. This case reminds us of the dangers of misinformation and panic. In her attempt to protect herself from SARS, the woman inadvertently put herself at even greater risk. Her death was a tragic, preventable outcome, underscoring the importance of following reliable, science-backed advice during health crises. It was October 23, 2017, in the small coastal village of Kuala Sanglang, northern Malaysia. The Nine Emperor Gods Festival, a major Taoist celebration, was in full swing, and crowds gathered to witness various rituals, including one performed by Lim Ba, a famous Taoist medium. Known for his extreme physical endurance, Lim, who was 68 years old, had become a local legend through his ritual known as human steaming. In this act, he would sit inside a large metal wok and endure being steamed alive, showcasing his spiritual strength. Lim had captivated his followers with this dangerous ritual for over a decade. Many saw it as a powerful symbol of faith, and it had drawn crowds to witness Lim's perceived invulnerability. However, his family was deeply concerned. Lim had undergone heart surgery the previous year, and his health had been in decline. His son Kang Huai and daughter Wei Ling had pleaded with him to stop. He was on medication for hypertension and hadn't been feeling well leading up to the event. Despite their warnings, Lim insisted on going through with the performance. At 10 p.m., Lim took his usual position in the large wok. Sitting in a lotus pose, he clasped his hands in prayer, and a massive steel lid was placed over the top. The fire underneath began to heat the wok, and food items like corn, rice, and buns were steamed alongside him. It was both a religious ritual and entertainment to the audience as they watched the steam rise from the wok. Everything appeared normal initially, with Lim sitting calmly inside as he had done many times before. His previous record for enduring this was 75 minutes, and no one expected anything different this time. However, after 30 minutes, strange noises were heard from within the wok. What began as soft sounds soon became frantic banging. Lim, once calm, was now in distress. Panic spread through the crowd as Lim's son and others rushed to lift the lid. When the lid was finally removed, Lim was found unconscious with severe burns covering his face, hands, and body. He had gone into cardiac arrest, and although efforts were made to revive him, they were unsuccessful. Lim was pronounced dead at the scene, and the cause of death was determined to be a heart attack worsened by the burns he suffered. The news of Lim's death shocked the local community. where he had long been regarded as a spiritual leader who appeared almost invincible. However, his family had always feared this day would come. His son had expressed that they had repeatedly urged him to stop, knowing the risks, especially after his surgery. His daughter Wei Ling noted that although he cherished the admiration of his followers, the family constantly worried about his safety. Following Lim's death, the temple canceled all further performances out of respect. Taoist officials distanced themselves from the ritual, with some explaining that it wasn't part of mainstream Taoist practice, but rather a fa shu, a magic-like performance that tested physical endurance. Tan Ho Kio, president of the Federation of Taoist Associations of Malaysia, emphasized that while such feats could attract believers, they were dangerous and not recommended. Lim's death brought attention to the risks of extreme rituals. Malaysia, known for its religious diversity, has a long history of endurance-based religious acts. Still, this incident underscored the potential danger of pushing the body beyond its limits, even in the name of faith. For Lim's family, the grief was overwhelming. They had always been aware of the risks, but his devotion to his followers and belief in his spiritual strength had always outweighed their concerns. Wei Ling noted that he had been performing these rituals for so long that they never imagined it would end this way. In the end, many wondered why Lim continued the ritual despite his deteriorating health. Having undergone heart surgery and being on medication for hypertension, it was clear that his body was no longer capable of handling such extreme conditions. Nonetheless, his belief in the ritual's power and his determination to continue ultimately proved to be too much for his weakening body to endure, leading to his untimely collapse. 26, 2023 in Biwabik, Minnesota, a small, quiet town. At around 3:30 p.m., local authorities received a call about a body found in a house that had been empty for months. When officers arrived, they entered a home with no running water or electricity. It had clearly been abandoned. In the basement, they discovered the body of 34-year-old Brandon Lee Bushman, locked inside an old chest freezer. Brandon, known to friends as Skippy, had a long history of legal troubles going back to 2011. His past included arrests for shoplifting, trespassing, operating a boat under the influence, and possession of illegal substances. At the time of his death, he had an outstanding warrant, though police haven't revealed what it was for. Brandon had been avoiding arrest and had recently taken refuge in this empty home located in Babbitt, a small town about 10 miles from Biwabik. The house had no power since April 2022 and had been completely unused since February 2023. It was a place far removed from the public, hidden but also dangerously isolated. People familiar with Brandon told investigators that he'd been seen at the house shortly before his body was found. Witnesses claimed they saw him running from the upstairs area, possibly thinking police were nearby. Although no records show that officers were actively searching the home at the time, Brandon seemed convinced they were closing in. In a panic, he ran into the basement and climbed inside a chest freezer to hide. This freezer was an older model, large, heavy, and with a latch-style lid that locked from the outside. Unlike newer models, it couldn't be opened from the inside once shut. Investigators believe Brandon thought it would be a temporary hiding spot, but once the lid closed, it sealed tight. Inside the freezer, authorities found a metal lawn ornament rod with him. It had been jammed between the rubber gasket and the lid's edge, clear evidence that he had tried to open it from the inside. But the rod got stuck and the freezer stayed shut. He was trapped. Because the house had no power or neighbors nearby, no one heard or saw anything. There were no lights, no sounds, just silence. When investigators opened the freezer, it wasn't running. The lack of electricity confirmed it hadn't worked in over a year. An autopsy revealed no signs of trauma and no indication that another person had been involved. Still, authorities needed answers. A toxicology report was ordered to determine if any substances may have influenced his state of mind or played a role in what happened. At the time the case was made public, those results had not yet been released. Gilbert police, who cover Biwabik, explained that the freezer had an outdated locking mechanism. Police Chief Tai Tekar confirmed that once closed, the lid latched shut with no way to open it from the inside. This type of freezer was taken off the market decades ago due to safety issues, but older homes still have them. Lieutenant Chelsea Trucano said witness accounts were unclear. Investigators weren't sure if Brandon entered the freezer sometime in early 2023 or even late 2022. Since the house had been empty since February 2023, there's no way to confirm exactly when he was last seen alive. Authorities from multiple agencies are working together to figure out that timeline. What happened to Brandon wasn't the result of violence or another person's actions. It came down to fear, isolation, and a series of rushed decisions. He believed hiding was his only choice, but once the lid closed, that choice became final. His family planned a memorial on July 15th at Babbitt Beach. Despite his past, they saw him as more than his mistakes. He was still someone's son and someone's friend, someone trying in his own way to survive. Until the toxicology results are in, some parts of Brandon's story remain unclear. But one thing is certain: he died completely alone in a forgotten house, locked away in silence. It was early 2014 in Santa Rosa, Argentina. Sonia Perez Lanzon, a 39-year-old amateur athlete and mother, was known in her community for her dedication to fitness. She ran marathons, trained in boxing, and raised her 20-year-old son, Kevin Berazategui. But despite her healthy lifestyle, those close to her noticed something else. Sonia had become deeply focused on changing her appearance. One friend who remained unnamed said she was obsessed with how she looked. This growing concern had already harmed her. The year before, she suffered third-degree burns from too much sun exposure. But the injury didn't stop her. In early 2014, she took things further, and this time it would cost her life. Without medical help or proper knowledge, Sonia began injecting Vaseline into her breasts. Vaseline, usually used to treat dry skin, is not meant for internal use. It's especially dangerous when it enters the bloodstream. But Sonia continued the process quietly, likely over several weeks, without telling friends or going to a clinic. Eventually, her health started to decline. She had trouble breathing and was taken to Lucio Molas Hospital in Santa Rosa, located about 350 miles southwest of Buenos Aires. Doctors found injuries on her chest, but had no idea what caused them. Her condition was serious, and her vital signs were unstable. At first, Sonia denied doing anything unusual, but as her condition worsened, she told the truth. She had been injecting Vaseline. The medical team was shocked. Dr. Julio Pla, the hospital's head of surgery, later said he had never seen anything like it in his career. By the time Sonia admitted what she'd done, the damage was already too severe. When Vaseline enters the bloodstream, the body doesn't know how to respond. It can cause blockages and inflammation. In Sonia's case, it led to a blood clot that traveled to her lungs. This condition, called a pulmonary embolism, blocks blood flow and can be fatal. Doctors tried to stabilize her. She remained in the hospital for a month, but the clot could not be removed. Sonia died from the effects of the injections on March 6, 2014. News of her death spread quickly, both locally and nationally. Many people were stunned. How could a strong, disciplined woman die from something so unexpected? The case raised difficult questions about beauty standards, pressure to change, and why someone would feel the need to take such a dangerous step. One article pointed out that pressure on women to appear perfect was higher than ever. Doctors used the case as a warning. Dr. Play told the media that while the human body can fight off bacteria and viruses, it has no defenses against petroleum products. Other medical professionals, like holistic dermatologist Dr. Alan Datner, explained that Vaseline varies in purity and is never safe to inject. When it reaches the lungs, it can cause a serious condition known as lipid pneumonia. Although most people use Vaseline safely, some have tried using it and other similar substances to change their appearance. There have been reports of individuals injecting it into their bodies, often resulting in long-term damage. But Sonia's story stood out because of how it ended and who she was. She wasn't a celebrity. She was a mother and a respected athlete. Her son Kevin was training to become a police officer. 2 days after her death, he posted a message online saying, "It has been 2 days since you haven't been here in this world. I will love you forever. The 20 years I spent by your side were beautiful. I'm going to live my life as a demonstration of your efforts as a fighter, as my lion-hearted mother." No one knows exactly when Sonia started the injections or whether she told anyone. What's known is that she made a choice she believed would help her, one that proved deadly. Her case remains one of the rare recorded deaths caused by Vaseline injection. And even now, Dr. Play's words continue to echo. "I've never seen a case like this." Sonia Perez Lanzon was 39 years old. March 29, 1987, in northern Australia, Ginger Faye Meadows, a 24-year-old model from Colorado, had been traveling the country after being inspired by the movie Crocodile Dundee. She was exploring remote parts of the country aboard a yacht called the Lady G, captained by Bruce Fitzpatrick. The plan was to travel from Broome to Darwin, then on to Papua New Guinea. But Ginger never made it past a place called King's Cascade Waterfall. That day, the yacht anchored near the waterfall in the Kimberley region. It was a beautiful but isolated area, also known to be extremely dangerous. Northern Australia is home to saltwater crocodiles, which can grow up to 6 meters long and are known to strike without warning. The Prince Regent River, where they anchored, is one of their common habitats. Before anyone left the yacht, Captain Fitzpatrick gave a clear warning. Don't go in the water, not even to dip your feet. These crocodiles often wait just below the surface, unseen. Despite this, Ginger and her friend Jane Burchett, the yacht's chef, went into the water near the base of the waterfall. While they splashed in the waist-deep water, the rest of the crew climbed the rocks to view the falls. From above, Fitzpatrick suddenly saw a 4-meter crocodile moving directly toward the women. He shouted for them to get out, but it was already too late. Realizing they couldn't reach the boat, the women moved to a small ledge under the waterfall, backs against the rock. The crocodile was only a few meters away, floating still with its eyes locked on them. Jane later described how the animal came close with its mouth open. She threw her shoe at it, hitting its head. The crocodile sank below the water. Thinking the danger had passed, Ginger let go of Jane and jumped in, trying to swim away. She only managed 2 strokes before the crocodile came up from beneath and dragged her under. Jane, frozen on the ledge, could only watch. The crocodile surfaced again with Ginger's body. Her arms were raised, eyes wide, then pulled her under for good. The next day, Ginger's body was found in the mangroves at the edge of the river. That day would have been her 25th birthday. A rescue boat retrieved her body and began a 15-kilometer journey downriver. During the trip, another crocodile lunged at the boat, attacking the body bag. Fearing more attacks, the crew stopped and waited for a larger vessel to help transport her remains to Broome. Ginger's estranged husband, Dwayne McCauley, flew in that week to identify her. The incident quickly spread in the media and became one of Australia's most well-known crocodile attacks. The story of a young traveler being taken by a crocodile in such a remote place shocked people across the world. Authorities later confirmed there were no warning signs at King's Cascade. The location was so remote and the tides so extreme that signs were rarely posted, but Captain Fitzpatrick said he had warned Ginger directly. This incident reignited national discussion. The Environment Minister called for stronger penalties against people who ignored warnings in crocodile zones. But many pointed out there were no signs, just Fitzpatrick's personal warning. A few weeks earlier, a fisherman had been killed in Kakadu National Park in front of tourists. 2 years earlier, another man died in almost the same location. These crocodiles treat humans like prey. They don't warn, and they don't hesitate. Their numbers have surged in recent decades due to hunting bans. In the early 1970s, there were only about 5,000 saltwater crocodiles in the wild. Now there are over 60,000. The full details of Ginger's injuries were never released. Authorities only confirmed signs of an animal attack and that her body was badly decomposed. What's clear is that she had been warned but still went into the water. And in that part of the world, that one decision cost her everything. Ginger's story is a chilling example of how quickly things can go wrong in the wild. She was seeking adventure, and it ended in tragedy.
It was September 23rd, 2017, at the Plas Talgarth holiday complex near Machynlleth, Wales. Elizabeth Isherwood, a 60-year-old former policewoman from Wolverhampton, arrived for a week-long stay. This trip was a last visit to the timeshare her family had recently sold. But Elizabeth, known as Mary to friends and family, would never return home. Elizabeth was fit and active, enjoying golf, caring for her grandchildren, and meeting new people through her job as a carer. She had been a policewoman, a teacher, and even worked for the post office before moving to New Zealand and later returning to the UK. This trip was meant to be a peaceful retreat, but it ended in tragedy. On the first night, Elizabeth got up to use the bathroom in her ensuite. She accidentally walked into the airing cupboard, mistaking it for the bathroom. The door handle malfunctioned, trapping her inside. Naked and disoriented, she struggled for hours to free herself. Elizabeth used all her strength to escape. She broke a pipe and used it to try to break through the walls. Unfortunately, the water sprayed from the broken pipe soaking her and speeding up hypothermia. Despite her struggle, her body temperature dropped dangerously low. Throughout the night and the next day, Elizabeth continued trying to escape. She clawed through brickwork and plaster, making significant progress. She managed to create a hole large enough to climb through, but didn't realize it was blocked by a picture screwed to the other side of the wall. Her cries for help went unheard, or were mistaken for maintenance work by other guests. A neighboring couple heard the banging and considered reporting it if it continued after 5 p.m. Sadly, Elizabeth's efforts ceased just after 5 p.m., leading them to believe it was maintenance workers finishing for the day. Exhausted and drenched, she eventually succumbed to hypothermia. Elizabeth's body was discovered a week later, on the day she was due to check out. Staff found her during an investigation into a water leak. Her clothes and suitcase were untouched, indicating she had never even unpacked. The inquest into her death ruled it as misadventure, concluding she died of hypothermia after becoming trapped. Elizabeth's son Craig and her ex-husband Clive were devastated by the news. They had to inform Elizabeth's grandchildren, Molly and Poppy, of the tragic circumstances. Craig described the conversation as the worst possible one a father could have with his children. The family was left shattered by the loss. Craig decided to take legal action against McDonald Resorts, the owners of the Place Talgarth complex. He believed the company was negligent in failing to properly maintain the door handle. Craig, represented by Adam Wilson from FBC Manby Bowdler, sought compensation not for money, but to prevent any other family from experiencing a similar tragedy. Adam Wilson stated that the central issue was whether the company was negligent in maintaining the property. He emphasized the horrific nature of the tragedy and the distress Elizabeth must have endured trying to free herself. The legal action aimed to secure compensation for Elizabeth's injuries and the loss of care she provided to her grandchildren. More importantly, it sought to hold the company accountable and prevent future incidents. Craig pointed out that the case wasn't about financial compensation. No amount of money could replace his mother. It was about acknowledging the mistake and preventing future negligence. Elizabeth had been a vibrant and active individual, with many years of happiness ahead of her. Her death was a senseless and avoidable tragedy, one that Craig hoped would lead to changes in how such properties were maintained. Elizabeth Isherwood led a remarkable life. She lived in New Zealand with her partner Rosie before returning to the UK. She took up a part-time job as a carer, which she loved because it allowed her to meet new people and stay active. Her relationship with her ex-husband, Clive, remained good despite their separation almost 30 years ago. They had met in the police force and stayed friends even after Elizabeth came out as gay. Their final meeting for a drink before her trip to Place Talgarth shows their enduring friendship. Clive and Craig described Elizabeth as a sporty, fit, and healthy woman who adored her grandchildren. The inquest into Elizabeth's death revealed the harrowing details of her final hours. It showed how she fought tirelessly to escape, using a broken pipe to claw through the plasterboard. The constant water spray and her lack of clothing led to the rapid onset of hypothermia, ultimately causing her death. The public's reaction to the case was one of shock and sympathy. Elizabeth's tragic death highlighted the importance of proper maintenance and safety measures in holiday resorts. Many questioned how such a preventable accident could have occurred and expressed support for Craig's legal action. It was an ordinary day in Massachusetts in 2019. A 54-year-old construction worker, whose name remains unknown, was having lunch at a fast food restaurant. He had always had a sweet tooth, often indulging in various candies. But his recent obsession with black licorice turned out to be a fatal choice. This is the unsettling story of how his love for candy led to his untimely death. The construction worker had a history of poor dietary habits. His meals primarily consisted of several packages of candy daily. For years, he had a particular liking for red fruit-flavored twists. However, 3 weeks before his death, he switched to black licorice. This seemingly minor change had catastrophic consequences. Black licorice contains glyceric acid, a compound derived from licorice root. This acid can cause a significant drop in potassium levels in the body, leading to serious health issues. According to Dr. Neil Butala, a cardiologist at Massachusetts General Hospital, even a small amount of licorice can increase blood pressure. But the construction worker's consumption was far from small. He was eating a bag and a half of black licorice every day. On that day, the man was enjoying his lunch when he suddenly began to feel unwell. Witnesses reported that he gasped, started shaking violently, and then lost consciousness. Emergency responders arrived quickly and performed CPR, reviving him briefly before rushing him to the hospital. The medical team discovered that he was experiencing ventricular fibrillation, a life-threatening heart rhythm problem. Despite their best efforts, the man died 32 hours after arriving at the hospital. A study published in the New England Journal of Medicine provided a detailed account of the man's condition. The study revealed that his potassium levels were dangerously low, leading to heart rhythm disturbances. This was directly linked to his excessive consumption of black licorice. Dr. Eliza R. Edelman, a physician mentioned in the study, diagnosed the man with metabolic, renal, vascular and cardiac toxicity due to apparent mineral or corticoid excess from licorice consumption. Essentially, the glyceric acid in the licorice had caused a dangerous buildup of cortisol in his body. This in turn led to high blood pressure, metabolic alkalosis, fatal heart arrhythmias, and kidney failure. The man's health was already compromised before his black licorice addiction. He had been a heavy smoker, consuming a pack of cigarettes a day for 36 years. Additionally, he had a history of heroin use disorder and untreated hepatitis C. These pre-existing conditions likely made his body more vulnerable to the toxic effects of the licorice. This tragic incident is not an isolated case. In 2017, the US Food and Drug Administration issued a warning about the dangers of glycyrrhizin, the sweetening compound found in black licorice. The FDA cautioned that eating as little as 2 ounces of black licorice a day for 2 weeks could lead to heart rhythm problems, particularly for individuals over 40.
It was July 2019 in Erzurum, Turkey. 24-year-old Zafer Kuzu had recently been convicted of causing harm to another person. Instead of prison, he was sentenced to community service, something that, while inconvenient, wasn't a severe punishment. But for Zafer, even this was too much. Determined to escape it, he came up with a reckless plan, one that would ultimately cost him his life. Zafer didn't want to complete his sentence. Instead, he convinced himself that if he were injured badly enough, he could avoid it altogether. His idea? To stage an accident that would send him to the hospital. It wasn't a well-thought-out plan, but it was one he was willing to go through with. He wasn't alone. 2 of his friends, an 18-year-old known as FY and another friend called FYT, agreed to help. The plan was simple but dangerous. Zafer would strap 2 pillows to his back to soften the impact, and one of his friends would shoot him with a shotgun at close range. The hope was that the blast would leave him injured, just enough to land him in a hospital bed, but not enough to cause real harm. But things did not go as planned. A shotgun doesn't fire a single bullet. It shoots multiple pellets at once, spreading out as they travel. Even with pillows as makeshift protection, Zafer was putting himself in serious danger. When FY pulled the trigger, the force of the blast tore through the fabric, completely bypassing the so-called padding. The impact was devastating. Zafer collapsed in pain. His friends, realizing the situation had gone horribly wrong, panicked. They rushed to help him, trying to get him medical attention, but it was too late. Before they could even leave the house, Zafer had succumbed to his injuries. Authorities were called to the scene shortly after. When police arrived, they detained both friends. FY, the one who fired the shotgun, was immediately arrested, while FYT was taken into custody for questioning. The shotgun was seized, and Zafer's body was sent to a forensic institute in Istanbul for an autopsy. During the investigation, details of the bizarre plan emerged. It became clear that Zafer had believed this was a way out of his punishment. Instead, his attempt to escape responsibility had led to an irreversible outcome. In court, FY faced legal consequences for his role in the incident. He was charged and placed in custody while proceedings took place. Meanwhile, FYT was released on bail, but remained under investigation. Zafer's story left many in shock. It was hard to understand why he would go to such extreme lengths to avoid something as minor as community service. His decision to stage an injury had not only failed, but had taken his life in the process. For his 2 friends, the reality of what had happened weighed heavily. What had started as a foolish plan had turned into something far more serious. They now had to live with the knowledge that their involvement had contributed to a tragic loss. Zafer's death was an unfortunate reminder that reckless decisions can have permanent consequences. He had sought a way out, but instead he had created a situation with no way back. His story, though unusual, serves as an example of how desperation can push people to make choices that lead to disaster. December 12, 2021, a quiet Sunday afternoon in Jaipur, India. Mohsin, a 29-year-old man from Uttar Pradesh, had been living in the city for 2 years with his partner and her young daughter. But this wasn't a typical relationship. The woman had left her husband and eloped with Mohsin, cutting ties with her past life. Since then, her husband had been searching for her, determined to find her and their child. That day, his search came to an end. The husband arrived at the apartment where Mohsin and his wife had been living. What exactly was said inside remains unclear, but the moment Mohsin saw him, he panicked. For 2 years, he had been avoiding this confrontation, and now, with nowhere to hide, he made a desperate decision. Instead of facing the situation, he ran to the balcony and jumped from the 5th floor. The fall was devastating. Mohsin landed hard, suffering critical injuries. His partner, who had witnessed everything, immediately rushed him to SMS Government Hospital, hoping he would survive, but the damage was too severe. That night, Mohsin succumbed to his injuries. The next day, his body was sent for a post-mortem examination before being handed over to his family. But the story didn't end there. In the aftermath of the tragedy, the woman and her husband disappeared. No one knew where they had gone, and authorities were unable to track them down. Their sudden vanishing only deepened the mystery surrounding the case. Investigators determined that Mohsin's reaction had been driven by fear. Rather than facing a confrontation, he had acted on impulse, making a choice that ultimately cost him his life. In the days leading up to the incident, Mohsin and the woman had moved into a new apartment near NRI Circle, hoping for a fresh start. But whatever peace they had found was short-lived. Police confirmed that the woman's husband had never stopped looking for her. When he finally found her, things took a turn no one had expected. Instead of a conversation, fear and panic took control, leading to a tragic end. Mohsin's family was left in shock. They struggled to understand why he had made such a desperate choice. Their grief was compounded by the unanswered questions surrounding his final moments. Meanwhile, authorities continued searching for the woman and her husband, but their whereabouts remained unknown. Mohsin's story is one of fear, impulsive decisions, and an unresolved mystery. His attempt to escape a difficult situation only led to devastating consequences. And with the key figures in the story now missing, the full truth may never come to light. 4th, 2012, at the Pittsburgh Zoo and PPG Aquarium. 2-year-old Maddox Lamar Durkosh was visiting the zoo with his parents, Jason and Elizabeth. The family stopped at the African Painted Dog exhibit, a popular attraction featuring a raised viewing platform where visitors could look down into the enclosure. While designed to provide a good view, this platform had risks, especially for small children. Wanting Maddox to see the animals better, Elizabeth lifted him onto the 4-foot-high railing. Despite posted warnings about safety, it was common for parents to hold their kids up for a better look. As she held him, Maddox lost his balance and slipped from her grasp. He fell 14 feet, missing the safety net below, which was only meant to catch small objects, not a child. He landed in the middle of the enclosure, right among the 11 wild dogs. The situation turned horrific almost instantly. The animals reacted to Maddox's fall, and despite zoo staff responding quickly, they were unable to reach him in time. A police officer fired a shot at one of the dogs in an attempt to stop the attack, but it was too late. Maddox had suffered fatal injuries. A veterinarian on the scene confirmed that there was nothing that could be done. The incident left everyone in shock. The exhibit was immediately closed, and the zoo contained the remaining animals. In the aftermath, the Durkosh family was devastated, and the tragedy sparked both legal and emotional battles. Elizabeth faced harsh criticism for lifting Maddox onto the railing, but authorities ultimately decided not to press charges. Allegheny County District Attorney Stephen A. Zappala Jr. ruled the event as a tragic accident. Still, the family pursued legal action against the zoo, arguing that it had failed to address safety concerns. Documents revealed that the zoo had known about the dangers of the exhibit since at least 2006. Staff had previously observed parents holding children over the railing, raising concerns that an accident could happen. However, no changes had been made. Despite this, the Pittsburgh Zoo insisted that the exhibit met all required safety standards, and had passed 35 federal inspections since it opened. Public opinion was divided. Some blamed the zoo for not taking action after repeated safety warnings, while others argued that Maddox's mother should have been more cautious. The case was eventually settled out of court, with the terms remaining confidential. Following the tragedy, the zoo made changes. The viewing platform where Maddox had fallen was removed, and the African painted dogs were relocated to other facilities. The exhibit was later replaced with a new one featuring cheetahs, but criticism remained, particularly regarding how the zoo handled the situation. Many felt it unfairly placed the blame on Elizabeth, who was already grieving the loss of her child. Despite their grief, Maddox's parents found a way to honor his memory. Since he loved toy trucks, the family started a donation drive, collecting toy trucks to give to children in need during the holiday season. The initiative touched many hearts, and thousands of people from across the country participated, ensuring that Maddox's love for trucks lived on in a meaningful way. While nothing could undo the tragedy, the incident led to broader discussions about safety in public spaces. It also raised difficult questions about responsibility, whether institutions like zoos should do more to prevent accidents, and how families navigate the unthinkable loss of a child. Maddox's story is one of immense sorrow, but his family has worked to keep his memory alive. Through their efforts, they not only bring joy to other children, but also remind others of the importance of safety, awareness, and the lasting impact of a single moment. 21st, 2004, in Lake Jackson, Texas. Michael Warner, a 58-year-old machine shop owner, was found dead inside his home. To most neighbors, he seemed like a quiet man who kept to himself. But privately, Michael had been living with a serious problem, one that would end in a tragic and unusual death that shocked everyone who heard about it. Michael had struggled with alcohol dependency for years, but he couldn't drink the normal way. He suffered from ulcers and severe acid reflux, making it painful to consume alcohol by mouth. Doctors had warned him that alcohol could be dangerous, even life-threatening. Still, Michael didn't stop. Instead, he found a different method: rectal alcohol use. According to those close to him, Michael was used to enemas from childhood. His mother gave them to him regularly, and over time he began using them on his own. As an adult, he experimented with different substances. His wife, Tammy Jean Warner, said he had recipes for enemas, ranging from coffee to soap and eventually alcohol. When alcohol is absorbed through the rectum, it bypasses the liver's first filter and goes directly into the bloodstream. The effects are stronger and happen faster, and the body has no natural defense like vomiting to stop it. On the night of May 20th, Michael used two 1.5-liter bottles of sherry, more than 100 fluid ounces, administered through an enema. That's far more than most people could drink orally without severe consequences. Michael passed out sometime during the night, but the alcohol kept entering his system even after he lost consciousness. By the next morning, he was gone. Toxicology tests showed a blood alcohol level of 0.47%, almost 6 times the legal limit for driving in Texas. Investigators were clear. This amount was enough to end a person's life. Detective Lieutenant Robert Turner, who led the case, called the level extremely high, adding that people with that amount of alcohol in their system usually end up either in the hospital or the morgue. But the investigation didn't stop with the toxicology report. Michael's wife, Tammy, was arrested and charged with criminally negligent homicide. Authorities claimed she had given him the alcohol enema, even though she knew how dangerous it was due to his health issues. They believed she knowingly took part in something that led directly to his death. Tammy denied this. She told the Houston Chronicle that Michael had done it himself. She said he had always given himself enemas and that it was something he'd been doing for years. According to her, she couldn't have done it even if she wanted to. He was in control of the process. She also denied another accusation, destroying Michael's will. That allegation added another layer to the case, making people question her role even more. Some saw her as an enabler. Others thought she was being unfairly blamed. Tammy was released on a $30,000 bond and was set to go to trial in July. She faced up to 2 years in prison and a $10,000 fine for each charge if found guilty. Michael's death made national news, not only because of how it happened, but also because of the questions it raised about personal choices and responsibility. Toxicologists explained that rectal alcohol use isn't a myth. It's a real dangerous practice that can easily go too far. Since the alcohol bypasses the body's normal filtering system, even small mistakes can turn deadly. 3 years after his death, Michael Warner was given a posthumous Darwin Award, a satirical recognition given to those who lose their lives through extreme lapses in judgment. The website called it an astounding misapplication of judgment. The story continued to be talked about online. Forums like Slashdot explored the science behind alcohol enemas. Some were shocked, while others admitted the practice wasn't as rare as it seemed. Medical experts warned against it, stressing that it was unsafe and could be fatal. While parts of the story may sound strange or even absurd, the reality is far from funny. Michael Warner was a man dealing with addiction and health problems. He made a choice that his body couldn't handle, and it cost him his life. Tammy's role in what happened remains debated to this day. But one thing is clear. This was more than just a bizarre news story. It was a real event with real consequences, and it left behind questions that may never be fully answered. February 8, 2020, in Mount Gambier, South Australia. Bradley Streeter, a 20-year-old from Lewiston, was out late that night with friends. They visited the Cave Garden Sinkhole, a well-known tourist spot famous for its scenic beauty, and a vertical drop of about 98 feet. The platform they stood on had served thousands safely over the years, protected by fencing and designed for clear views of the cave below. Bradley was known for being outgoing, energetic, and adventurous. He had a deep interest in mechanics, loved working with vehicles, and often bought, dismantled, and sold car parts online. He enjoyed off-roading, camping, and fishing. His mom, Mary Ann, described him as her heart, mind, and soul. A family friend said he had such a strong presence that even those who met him briefly remembered him. He had big plans to become a mechanic and had gone through at least 10 motorbikes by then. He loved spending time outdoors, working with his hands and taking on new challenges. But on that night, one quick decision changed everything. Just before midnight, Bradley climbed onto the railing of the lower viewing platform above the Cave Garden Sinkhole. According to police, he was attempting a handstand on a narrow rail nearly 100 feet above the rocky cave floor. This wasn't the first time someone had taken a risk at that spot. In 2005, a man fell 33 feet trying to get closer to the edge and suffered serious injuries. In 2011, 2 others climbed into the sinkhole illegally and one had to be rescued and airlifted out. But what happened to Bradley would be the most severe. His friend stood nearby as he flipped upside down. Then he lost his balance. He fell. There was nothing anyone could do. Emergency services were called right away. Police, fire crews, and the state emergency service all responded. Inspector Campbell Hill got the call just after midnight. Someone had fallen into the sinkhole. He knew it was a job for the rope rescue unit. The cave gardens are part of an old volcanic system with steep rock walls covered in vines. A waterfall sometimes flows through it, and at night there's a light and sound show telling local Aboriginal stories. But for all its beauty, the sinkhole is also deadly. 9 fire crew members were involved in retrieving Bradley's body. The rescue took several hours and ended after 3 a.m. By then, he had already been pronounced deceased. Station Officer Rob Baker said recovering someone in situations like this is never easy, but it matters to the families. He acknowledged how challenging the operation was and mentioned that emotional support was offered to the team. Police confirmed there was no foul play. It was a heartbreaking accident. Friends began posting tributes as soon as they heard. One wrote, "I'll love you forever. You were the best mate." Another said, "Too many memories to count. I'll always remember our time together." A third wrote, "You were taken too soon. Fly high with your dad." That last comment referred to another loss. Bradley's father had passed away just 2 years before. Now, Mary Ann had lost both her son and husband. The local funeral home helped the family, and a fundraiser was launched to support funeral expenses. Mount Gambier's mayor, Lynette Martin, shared her sympathy and said the city might revisit its safety measures, despite the platform having been secure for years. Inspector Hill said responders and witnesses were deeply shaken. When told the reason Bradley had fallen, he was stunned. "He did what?" he reportedly asked. It was a split-second decision, one that may have seemed harmless at ground level, but from nearly 100 feet up it had fatal consequences. Bradley was full of life, with dreams and people who loved him, but all it took was one mistake for everything to change. Now the cave gardens are still open to the public. They remain quiet, peaceful, and beautiful. But for those who knew Bradley, the place now carries a heavy memory. 8th, 2010 was supposed to be an ordinary day in Mount Carroll, Illinois. As morning came, 3 young men, Wyatt Whitebread, Alex Pacus, and Will Piper, made their way toward the Hossbach grain storage complex, where they were supposed to walk down the corn. Yet by nightfall, the rural town would be gripped by unspeakable tragedy. At 14 years old, Wyatt Whitebread was a spirited boy. He had been excited to earn his first paycheck working at the Hossbach grain storage complex. But things had changed. Wyatt had recently expressed unease about the nature of his work, even proclaiming that he wished he never had to see another kernel of corn for the rest of his life. His co-workers were 19-year-old Alex Packus and 20-year-old Will Piper. None of them had experience in grain handling, which had proved to be a lot more complicated than they'd anticipated. And none of them fully grasped the dangers of the task they faced that day, breaking up clogged corn in a grain bin towering 4 stories high. The job, referred to as walking down the corn, required the boys to shovel kernels toward a central drain hole at the bottom of the bin, allowing the corn to flow freely into the conveyor below. The work began smoothly, but the conditions were dangerous. Beneath the 250,000 bushels of damp, compacted corn was an active conveyor system whose continuous movement turned the grain into a fluid trap. It was about 9:45 a.m. that day when 14-year-old Wyatt began sinking into the corn, the damp grain swallowing him like quicksand. Alex and Will sprang into action. The older boys attempted to pull Wyatt free, grasping him under the arms, but it was useless. The unstable surface gave way beneath their feet, and before they knew it, Alex and Will started to sink as well. Wyatt disappeared first, buried by the cascading corn. Alex and Will struggled to stay afloat as the grains piled relentlessly around them. Alex's cries for help grew fainter as the corn reached his neck and then his chin. Will, trapped up to his chest, used his free arm to try and keep the kernels away from Alex's head. But Will couldn't keep up with the cascade of corn. Soon after, he couldn't do anything but watch in horror as his friend succumbed and wondered if he was going to be next. By now, the corn was up to his chin. Hausbach supervisor Matt Schaffner called for help and then climbed into the bin himself to try to dig the boys out. But he quickly realized it was an impossible task. The Mount Carroll Fire Department arrived within minutes, quickly realizing the enormity of the situation. Grain bins are notoriously treacherous, and extracting victims from them requires specialized techniques. Firefighters, paramedics, and technical rescue teams converged on the site, eventually numbering over 200 responders. Rescuers employed grain vacuums, custom-made rescue tubes, and even improvised methods like cutting the bottom out of a bucket to shield Will's face. They worked tirelessly in stifling heat, battling a heat index of 114 degrees inside the metal silo. Despite their efforts, progress was painstakingly slow. Will Piper remained trapped for nearly 6 hours, his body immobilized and his mind haunted by the death of his friends. At one point, rescuers instructed him to embrace Alex's lifeless body to create space for the vacuum to work. Will was eventually rescued and taken to the hospital. Alex's body was retrieved, but Wyatt's remains were buried under layers of corn. Rescuers worked late into the night, finally recovering the 14-year-old's remains. The loss of Wyatt Whitebread and Alex Packus devastated their families. Will Piper faced profound emotional scars. Even more, the tragedy revealed glaring safety failures at Hausbach LC. OSHA's investigation uncovered 25 safety violations, including 12 classified as willful. The boys had received no safety training, were not equipped with harnesses, and were sent into the bin while the machinery below remained operational, a direct violation of safety protocols. Hausbach LLC was initially fined $555,000, but this was later reduced to $200,000, igniting outrage among the victims' families. Civil lawsuits followed, with a jury awarding nearly $17 million in damages, $8 million each to the families of Wyatt and Alex, and $875,000 to Will. The verdict marked a record for Carroll County, but brought little solace to the grieving families. Wyatt's mother, Carla, a retired Army major, struggled with the knowledge that Wyatt hadn't told her he was running down corn. Alex's mother, Annette, grappled with the knowledge that her son died in terror, his final moments consumed by fear. Nothing could bring their children back. It was late afternoon of January 29, 1931, when neighbors and friends gathered at Edward and Delphine Hines' farmstead near Grafton, North Dakota. The Hines were throwing a festive dinner party which promised to be an evening of dancing, laughter, and games, a much-needed reprieve from the harsh winter. But as the night wore on, the unsuspecting guests were served a meal that would forever be marked in North Dakota's history. The party concluded with a late-night spread prepared by Delphine. Among the courses was a pea salad featuring home-canned peas, which Delphine had prepared herself, mayonnaise, cheese, and lettuce. Unbeknownst to everyone, including the Hines, these peas harbored a hidden deadly menace. The nightmare began the following day. Arthur Geranby, a 31-year-old farmer, experienced intense stomach pains while tending to his chores. He alerted his family, which rushed to his aid, but not even them or the doctors they employed could save Arthur. By Saturday, he had slipped into a coma. In the meantime, the doctors had figured out the cause of Arthur's illness, the botulinum toxin, produced by the bacteria Clostridium botulinum. On Saturday afternoon, Arthur Geranby succumbed to the toxin's effects. His death marked the beginning of an unrelenting series of tragedies. Harry Chapiowski, an 8th grader who had attended the party, appeared healthy enough to play in a basketball game on Friday. Yet by the next evening, he too was gone. Harry's mom, Mrs. Thomas Chapiowski, died a day later, followed closely by her lifelong friend, who had also attended the party, Mrs. Elmer Stoke. Delphine Hine and her family were not spared. The first to fall ill was Edward Jr., her 16-year-old son, who passed away on Saturday evening. Delphine herself succumbed just 4 hours later. By Sunday night, Edward Sr. and their eldest daughter, 20-year-old Elizabeth, had also perished. Genevieve, only 15, followed early Monday morning. The poison did not discriminate, taking the lives of 13 party attendees over 9 days. Among the deceased were lifelong friends, close relatives, and neighbors. The deaths were eerily consistent, with symptoms of dizziness, impaired vision, and respiratory failure marking the toxin's lethal progression. Those who survived, such as Elmer Stoke, were spared only by chance. Elmer had not eaten the salad. Medical experts acted swiftly once botulism was identified as the culprit. A specialist from the University of Chicago traveled to Grafton with antitoxin serum, but the treatment was rare and prohibitively expensive. It was also only effective if administered early in the illness, and by the time it reached the town, most victims were beyond saving. The last fatality, Winfield Ware, died 9 days after the party, having shown signs of improvement before his condition rapidly deteriorated. Elmer Stoke wasn't the only survivor. 3 of the Hine children also survived. 14-year-old Richard, 12-year-old Wilfred, and 3-year-old Marvin had been spared only because they were too young to join the party and had remained in their rooms that night. Yet their survival came at an unimaginable cost. They lost both parents and 3 siblings in a matter of days. The boys were taken in by relatives, but their lives were forever altered. Richard, known as Dick, grew up quickly, leaving his relatives' home to work as a farm laborer. He would go on to establish his successful dairy operation in Minnesota, passing away in 2013 at age 96. Wilfred, or Bill, worked in California's aircraft industry, while Marvin, affectionately called Buddy, returned to North Dakota after serving in World War II and built a life in the grain business. Despite their resilience, the trauma of the event lingered with them. Dick's poignant plea to save their mother's wedding ring so they would have something to remember her by underscored the depth of their loss. It was a tragedy unlike anything Grafton or North America had seen before. Residents mourned the victims during a 4-day funeral procession, during which the town closed its businesses and declared a period of mourning. Fear spread as homemakers threw away their home-canned goods, many discarding entire pantries, despite the economic hardship of the Great Depression. For months, some families subsisted on little more than toast and tea, wary of hidden dangers lurking in their food. But there are lessons to be learned even in the darkest of times. The disaster prompted greater scrutiny of home canning practices, highlighting the importance of proper sterilization and the use of pressure canners for low-acid foods. Though botulism remains rare, the Grafton tragedy stands as a stark reminder of its deadly potential. Today, advancements in food safety guidelines and education seek to prevent such a tragedy from recurring. However, the memory of the poison pea party became a cautionary tale, etched into the history of a town that would never forget. 2007, Sheila K. Ross and her husband Dane, seasoned truck drivers from McLeod, Oklahoma, were on a routine trip. They had traveled to Yuma, Arizona to collect supplies from a Dole plant. But what began as an ordinary evening would take a devastating turn, changing the lives of all those involved. That evening, when they arrived at the plant in Arizona, Sheila exited their truck to retrieve paperwork for their load. But when the 47-year-old woman failed to return, her husband Dane became overcome by worry. He too exited the truck and searched the premises himself, but there was no sign of his wife. Dane decided to notify the Yuma police and ask for their help. Officers conducted an extensive search but found no sign of Sheila. As hours turned into days, her disappearance remained a mystery. 3 days later, a dock worker at the Hy-Vee grocery store distribution center in Chariton, Iowa, made a grim discovery. Sheila's body was found in the back of a semi-trailer delivering lettuce. The trailer, owned by a different trucking company, had been at the same Dole plant in Yuma on the night Sheila disappeared. Authorities determined that Sheila had been pinned inside the truck during loading, and the compressive force of the pallets of lettuce caused her death. According to Dr. John Kramer, the autopsy showed Sheila was asleep. Investigators believe Sheila was accidentally pushed into the trailer by a forklift operating in the loading area. Unnoticed by the driver, she became trapped between the heavy pallets of produce. The intense pressure left her unable to breathe. Her body remained undetected as the trailer traveled nearly 1,500 miles to Iowa. Sheila died on Tuesday, January 30th, 2007. Statements from Dole confirmed the company's cooperation with law enforcement, but offered little solace to Sheila's grieving family. The lettuce in the shipment was destroyed, a minor detail in the face of such a profound loss. Sheila, remembered as a dedicated truck driver and loving wife, had worked alongside Dane for years. Married in 1980, the couple shared a son, Daniel, and a granddaughter. Her funeral service, held on February 5, 2007, brought together family and friends to honor her memory.